Hey folks, Matt McQueenie, Mix Minus Podcast. Monday, August 13th, 2018. Gosh, what do we have, about 2 weeks left of summer in effect? Summer goes to the 22nd of September, but no one counts September. I just returned from my August vacation, which every year is Wildwood Crest, the Port Royal Hotel in Wildwood Crest, right on the beach there. Wildwood is where my wife has always gone with her family, and I can't even count. It's possible it's been 6-7 years now that we've gone every year. I was never somebody who, growing up, went to the same vacation spot like a hotel. We always went to our summer home, so there was that routine. But it's been interesting going to the same hotel year after year at these same exact dates or date stretch. And it's been especially interesting with a nearly 4-year-old. Liam will be 4 in November. It's unbelievable. So we've had several years now where we have seen the progression of his life each year as we go to Wildwood. And the progression now is that a kid who does not nap anymore. And it's funny. It's kind of a give and take a little bit. It's touch and go. When you have the kid napping, you have that built-in time during the day where you can put him or her, if you have a female child, down to sleep. And for Liam, the last handful of years, it's been about 1 to 4 in the afternoon has been his nap. Before that, there was about an hour to an hour and a half nap in the morning, and then an hour to an hour and a half nap in the afternoon. But for the last handful of years, it has been that large chunk 2 to 3 hour nap from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And you become built around that time, around what you can do. You sort of put him down, you make sure he's asleep, and then you make a jailbreak for it to do whatever you're going to do, whether it's podcasting or watching shows or writing articles or any free time, side job type things you need to do on weekends, because obviously he's with nannies and mother-in-laws and mothers during the week. But on that weekend, you make the break for it. And when you're on vacation, that's the case as well. So you become used to using that period of time as much as possible, as efficiently as possible. And it's great. It's great to have that break. My brother likened it, he has 2 children. He has 2 daughters. One is about 5 months younger than Liam. So she is probably 3 1/4. She'll be coming up on 3 1/2 soon. And then he has maybe a 13-month-old at this point, so just over a year old. And he had it right. He was likening nap time to halftime. So the start of your day is sort of the first and second quarter, or if it's college basketball, the first half. And then you have the second half, you have the third and fourth quarter in that second part of the day. But that halftime is key. Halftime is a big deal when you're in sports and when you're a parent. You use it to refresh. You use it to learn from the first half what you can do in the second half. And you kind of go over the tape. You go over all of the things you learned in that first half, and you prepare for the second half, and you get a rest. Maybe you get a massage. Maybe you get some electric stim. You get some food in you, some electrolytes, and you really kind of gird yourself for the rest of the day. Makes a lot of sense to me. I really like that. I hadn't thought of that. As a guy who thinks in sports metaphors all the time, I thought that was a good one. So when they get to the point where they're not napping, which has now been about a 2-week run, so I think it might be over. We've had a couple of days here or there, maybe 2 days in this run where he did get a nap, but it was sort of the end of the road fatigue kind of nap where he had to sleep regardless. It wasn't like a routine where you set him up and you put him down. This was like, I am so exhausted, I'm sleeping. The good thing with a nap is that bedtime is now much earlier than it was during the nap period. So when our son slept from that 1 to 4, he would go to bed around 8:30 or maybe even 9. And you really can't go on with your night until you're assured he's asleep, because Now that he's in a bed as well, which has been in effect since early July, since the very beginning of July, he will just run out of that bed, and his go-to is, I got to go potty. So all of a sudden, this kid who can hold going potty for 3 hours during the day needs to go about 17 times before bed. It's the only excuse he knows in the book to allow us to understand that he's out of bed. He can't say anything else. What's he going to say? I want to come downstairs. Can't do it. He knows the one go-to is I got to go potty. So all of a sudden, there are 17 potty runs, and you get more and more frustrated and crazed, and the whole situation becomes ridiculous. And if you were videotaped, you would probably look like a child yourself, yelling at this kid about not going potty. You're going potty too much. In this time where we potty train them, and all we want them to do is get to this point where they are self-sufficient going to the potty, now we're yelling at them for going too many times. It's an absolutely absurd existence, and parenting is just silly. Thank God 98% of parenting is not on videotape, because we would look worse than the kids we are watching on our monitors. So that's an issue. He goes down later, and now your night is very confined, and it's late, and maybe you eat as we did after he goes down, and so you're finding yourself eat around 9:15, and now there's no time when that's all done with the cleanup. There's just no time to go on and do anything else. You maybe watch 15, 20 minutes of a show, put the sleep machine on, and then it's lights out. But now that he goes to bed earlier, which by the way is a good thing during the week, because I'm not home during the day, so I don't have to deal with the effects of a 4-year-old or a soon-to-be 4-year-old who's not sleeping during the day. I don't have to deal with the effects of having to keep him occupied all day. Selfish, I know, but that's just kind of the way things land. So I get home around 6:45, and boom, it's the bedtime routine. That bedtime routine is still long. It still can be upwards 45 minutes to an hour, but you're looking at a kid who now falls asleep at 8, and it is like found money when you come out of that and he's asleep. You get your food in you a little earlier, and then you just start watching stuff. And that aspect is pretty good. And I do have to say, when we were on vacation and you throw into the mix the fact that you have this kid in the sun, in the middle of summer, dog days of summer sun, going in the beach, running from the beach to the water, back to the tents and the chairs, and digging, and then running back to the water, running in the waves, sort of like wrestling the waves, right? Like playing football. You're wearing that kid down. Then you go up to the hotel, and it's like a mile walk. It feels like it. It's not really, but it's quite a walk. Get back to the hotel. Then that kid is in the pool. You throw on those floaties, and he's in that pool for an hour and a half. So he is completely spent. So now all you got to do is maybe throw a Shrek on, maybe throw an episode or two of something he likes to watch, and all of a sudden you're at dinner time down the shore, which is early bird special now, 5 o'clock dinner. Get a couple drinks in you, get some food, you're back to the hotel, and you're already in the bedtime routine. And now he's asleep. He's knocked out from all that physical activity, and he is asleep by 8. You're home free. My wife was going for little walks with her aunt, or she would go up and visit with her family. I would just be in the room watching stuff. And it's good. It's good to have that opening now. It is tough on the weekends when you are in sole control of having to occupy that child for the whole day. That can be tough. But you know what? You just kind of get to halftime is no longer in play. It's like LeBron James, playing the whole game, but maybe finding ways to rest while he's on the court, maybe not running all out on every play so as not to use up the bandwidth of those 48 possible minutes he can play. You do your best. So maybe it's handing over the little Amazon Fire tablet we got him. He can watch a little something while I'm reading. Everything works. You figure out what you have to do as a parent. No matter what you do, as long as you're caring, as long as you're not allowing them to do whatever they want, or you're not caring for them, they're going to turn out okay. In essence, they're going to do that. So we have all of these modern marvels that we can hand their way, and it can use up certain hours of the day. You got to do it. So it's a key factor. So while there might not be that nap, there is something you can always do. But the hard part is, I like the middle of the day being the time where I get productive things done. It is hard as it is right now after 10 p.m. trying to do a podcast. I'm shot. I've been up since about 6 a.m. when our son woke up in Wildwood Crest in our hotel room. He got up early today. So when I would go at 1 p.m. to do a podcast, I was fresh. I could get a cappuccino in me, a latte, and then I'm raring to go. I'm ready. It's still light out. I still got quite a bit of my early day energy. Now it's tough. Now you're dragging a little. And when you get to nighttime, you can always convince yourself out of doing something. It's sort of like exercising. I found it was very simple to exercise in the morning. It is hard to get up, but once you're up, you're fresh. You get a coffee in you. You get working out. You are using your bandwidth at the time where it's the most full. So you can go for broke on exercising. You can go for broke on lifting. You got all the energy in the world. It's only going to be drawing down the rest of the day. Whereas when you work out at night, you have to find a way to manage that bandwidth so you have enough in the tank at night to get your lift on, to get your run on, to get your stair step or whatever it is you do in your exercise routine. Yoga might be a little easier at night. Although it's funny because I've read a lot that if you want to lift heavy and if you want to be your strongest, it's actually at night. Cardio is a little tougher. I always find that to be the case too. I find you're winded more at night when you try to do cardio after trying to manage a day. And it's hard to manage a day. What are you going to eat for breakfast? What are you going to eat for lunch? How are you going to keep snacks? How are you going to know how many calories you need to get through that night workout? And now all of a sudden you're just living through the day to get to a night workout. You work out in the morning, you know exactly what nutrition you need during the day because your body's asking for it. Your body's hungry. It's saying, I want a shake. It's saying, I want protein. I want carbs. I want oatmeal. It knows exactly what it wants. And then by the nighttime, you were able to kind of manage your nutrition throughout the day so that you're not at a deficit somewhere. So that really ends up being a good situation. It does have its positives. And look, sometimes you have to work out at night. Sometimes you have to do the hard thing at night. You always want to try to do the harder things early in the day and do the autopilot things later in the day. It's just how it breaks. But sometimes you can't do it. Sometimes you just don't have the ability in your schedule to do things on the earlier side. I need to try to get sleep where I can get it. I have long commutes. So to get up early in the morning, I need to have more assurance that my day is going to fall on schedule a certain way. I can't have a child waking up in the middle of the night once, twice in the middle of the night, getting me up because that's going to throw it off and now I'm going to be too tired to even drive to work. So you really need to manage things the right way. So just because of that necessity, I find myself now having to do content, podcasts at night, and I now find myself working out in the middle of the day because I need to make sure I can get sleep where I can get it, bank that sleep, get it in place. I'd love to get up early. Maybe when I have children at their more advanced ages where they're way more self-sufficient about things, I will go back to working out in the morning when I can be assured how my day is going to break out. But I'm not assured there yet. So it is what it is. But we are dealing with that as a parent or as parents of a toddler. Well, I keep saying toddler. I like that word better than pre-K. I just like the word toddler. But he's apparently past that after 2. But yeah, it was a good trip. I mean, I always start vacations really anxious, and I'm not an anxious person, but I think leading up to vacations, I almost know it's coming. So I get less sleep. I drink more coffee. I go for broke in certain regards. And then by the time I get to that first day of vacation, I'm just not settled. All of a sudden you get a couple of nights of sleep in you. You get some routine to you. I get my boogie boarding going. I get my exercise. I expend the amount of energy I need to expend. I consume the amount of content I need to consume. Television, magazines, all that, podcasts, whatever it is. And I start to feel like myself. I start to feel better. And I end up really appreciating the routine I'm finding in that new place. So then that ends up being the case. One of the tough things on the trip, my Uncle Robert passed away on the first night of the vacation, which was Wednesday night. And he was somebody who was very important to my upbringing. I had not been in contact with him as much for probably the last 10 to 15 years. He was always around. It was always Uncle Rob. It was always Bobby to everybody else. Great guy. He was really responsible for taking my brother and I, when we were younger, to wherever we needed to go, whether it was from school to a babysitter to a nanny. babysitting us on weekends, doing what needs to be done there. He was very integral in our lives. And in some ways, that's more important than being integral more of recent. And that really, it was something that hit. And I penned a Facebook post. A lot of people I know saw it. They appreciated it. I penned a Facebook post in the way I like to write, kind of bringing in a little roast action to it, bringing in sentimentality, joking, comedic aspects. And I think it hit home. It was good for me. It felt important to do. Even though I'd not been around him that much, I actually did see him the Sunday before. Went to the hospital, Holy Name Hospital in Teaneck. We went over there, my wife and I, and it ended up being my sister Maeve and her boyfriend Nick and my dad. We went over there to visit. Had no idea that was going to be it. That would be the last time I saw him. He was really worn down. He was not himself. He was not there. He was really in the death process. And anybody who has been in contact with that knows what I mean. There's a sort of process as you head down that tunnel, wherever that leads, whether you're religious, whether or not, there's some tunnel, there's something that at least happens in the body that gets released, different, kind of different compounds through the body that get released only in that death period. And it becomes a very in and out of consciousness state. There wasn't much he was saying that was cogent or coherent. He was doing his best just to kind of stay there. I think there was quite a bit of morphine going through the body. And I can't imagine being in that process. You have no choice once it gets there. You can only deal with it as you can. You can only get through it the way you can. You can only hold on as long as you personally really want to or can hold on. And there's no shame in not, as far as I can see. I think you just sort of know. And that's got to be a sad state internally when you just know that's it. And you've built this life for him. It was 61 years. A lot of his life was just purely focused on Bergen County, New Jersey. He never really ventured far afield from there. Maybe he would go to the shore once in a while, but he was a Bergen County boy through and through. Always stayed there from when he was born until when he died in Bergen County. And I was kind of joking in that post that on my on the couple of days around my wedding, when people started getting to the hotel, I think it was actually the day. It was probably the day of the wedding. It might have been the day before, but it was in Livingston, New Jersey, which is not that far away from it all. A lot of people live in Livingston and commute to New York City. It's right off of Route 3 there, right off of Route 280. You can get into New York City in no time. It's a very simple process. And my Uncle Robert, I remember he got into the hotel and he said, "Maddie, there's casinos out here, right?" He literally thought we were in the Poconos, I think. Like, that's how insular his Bergen County world was. And it's hilarious how close Bergen County itself, and especially where he lived, how close it is to the George Washington Bridge in New York. And he just never cared about going to New York, really. He just wanted to stay in his little, kind of nucleus of Bergen County. That was where he wanted to stay. And he always stayed there and he was comfortable there. And he made his mark. He had a lot of friends. A lot of people liked him. He did a lot of good things for people, and there's remembrances. The post I did was as much for him as it was for me. A lot of people were kind of saying sorry for your loss in the post, but there were many who said he sounded like a good guy, he sounded like a great guy, and that was really what I wanted to get across. You know, Thoreau had this idea that we lead these lives of quiet desperation, and I think to a degree it's true. And I think for someone like my Uncle Robert, he's not going to get awards. He's not going to go into some Hall of Fame for picking up his nephews day in and day out, allowing my parents to go full bore after their professional pursuits, which meant they had to be away during the day. Many of us have to be away. I have to be away during the day. I can't be home to pick my son up or to do this and that or to ferry him to different activities. I do my best to do it. But my parents certainly could not do that. There was no way to really break away during the day at that period in their lives as they were trying to accumulate and build up in their careers and show a level of devotion to their job that's necessary. It doesn't mean devotion only to their job and not to their kids, but it's a necessary devotion in the professional world. And this guy, my uncle, he would just while he was holding down all these jobs, he would find a way to sneak out. Look, he was paid. I know he was paid. He's probably paid well to do this, but that doesn't take away from him doing it, from him fulfilling the familial responsibility, him being close to where we were, closer to us than my parents would be. So he would come and do it. In the middle of the day, he would break off from work. He would drive us from point A to point B, and he would get us there safely. And as a parent, that's all you can ask for. You want to have that peace of mind during the day that your kid is taken care of, that he or she is in safe quarters, that he or she are with trusted individuals. And look, my uncle was a little nutty. He was a drunk, and he'd been sober for nearly 35 years by the time he died. So he was somebody who really came around, and very early on, relatively in life, he figured out he had a problem, and he never had a relapse on that. As far as I can tell, I don't think. He never had a relapse. He never talked about it again, and he moved on. And several of my dad's other brothers took much longer to reach that point and hit depths of despair that were much deeper than he had reached. And he was able to come back from it, and he did a great job. And it was a testament to his coming back from that my parents would put that trust in him at that point to ferry their young children around place to place, to watch them on weekends, to do what needed to be done to allow my parents to kind of go on, to go on. They never would have, I think, been able to move on at the levels they did had someone like that not stepped in. Sure, you reach a point where you make enough money that you could pay outsiders, nannies, whatever the case may be, to do those jobs. But at that point in life, it was necessary. My Uncle Rob was there to do that. They did not have the money to spend on outside folks. They needed that one person to do it, and he did it. And, I'll never forget it, because in those periods of time, you got very close to him. It would be him, me, my brother Mike, and his dog Duke in those kind of Ford Ranger trucks where there was only, the one bucket seat, and we'd all have to jam in there, and he'd take us wherever we had to go. So it was sad to see him go. He fought hard on pancreatic cancer. He fought real hard, and literally right up until the last 2 weeks, where he finally saw that it was going to vanquish him, it was going to get him, it was a competitor he couldn't take on, he was fighting it tooth and nail. He was like, I'll get out of this. I'll be fine. He sort of had a naivety to it, which sometimes I think you need. Who cares to be naive about your own living? Whatever gets you through, whatever helps you find some semblance of normalcy in the situation, it's just something you have to do. But he did pass away when we were away. And interestingly enough, my wife, actually, he passed away on Thursday, because my wife, Melanie, who has the ability to see things in whatever that, is it third realm? I don't know what the realm is, but the realm outside of what we all see or hear or touch or taste, she can see other things. She's one of those people who can see ghosts, and who knows what you're seeing? Who knows if it's compounds in your brain helping you see something? Who knows if you have some sixth sense to be able to see these? Who knows? But she sees something. She sees, in my time with her, she's seen things. In my house in Mahwah, where I grew up since 6th grade, basically my growing up home, the home I was in for my formative years. We stayed one night on the 3rd floor of that house, and we woke up, and she said that she saw somebody at the foot of our bed. This is a room on the 3rd floor of this house. I grew up on the 3rd floor. I always felt like a boss, because we moved into this beautiful home. I guess my dad had made a certain amount of money that we could move into this beautiful home at that point in time. And we went there from a very small home, and all of a sudden I had a 3rd floor to myself, because at that point there was only me, my brother Mike, who's 4 years younger than me, and then a newly born, basically 1-year-old Tom at that point when we moved into Mahwah. It was his entrance into the world, and then ultimately Maeve was added to the mix about 18 months, or whatever it is, a year and a half later, a little more than that. When she came into the world, we needed more space. The house we were in Hillsdale was not going to make it work, so my parents really moved up. And I remember moving into this house, and I was going to be on the 3rd floor. I had a big room on the 3rd floor overlooking this nice lawn. And so I lived in that room for from when I was 13 or 12 until I was like 25 or 26. So I was in there for 12, 13 years. That was my room. That was my home. It was almost like an apartment on top of the house. And so that was my room. And then across the hall, there was this one room no one ever really stayed in. There was a point where my brother Mike kind of moved in there. He would move between that room and then the other room where he had originally lived when we were in this house or grew up in. But there was this side room and no one knew anything about it. And years later, my friend got married. And so he was getting married close to Mawa. And so we stayed the night there. The only room that was available to stay in was this little side room. This room I would walk by every night, every day, because the bathroom on the third floor was basically behind this room. It used to connect actually from this room to the bathroom. They remodeled the bathroom. It no longer connected. Excuse me, but it was there. And this one night we stay there, we wake up and Melanie says, I saw someone at the edge of our bed. It was a man looking out the window, kind of with his arm up on the window. He had overalls and he was almost like chewing a weed, and he looked at her. And I was like, well, great, I'm never staying here again. But she saw something. And then I believe my brother's to-be wife, which might have been his wife at the time, Amanda, she saw something there. Weirdly enough, I think it was a week or two after the night we stayed there, my sister Maeve, who was in high school, was being driven home from her high school by one of the mothers of her friends. And the mother said to her, I used to be a live-in nanny in your home many years ago, and I lived on the third floor, and I saw a ghost there. There's a ghost on the third floor. It's a man in overalls chewing a weed, looking out the window, and literally I'm sitting there going, oh my God, synchronicity exists. I always think this is the case. Synchronicity is one of my favorite words. It's not just a police song. It's just a tremendous word. It's the simultaneous occurrence of events that appear significantly related but have no discernible causal connection. I love this word because I think when synchronicity happens in life, it makes you realize, believe, think there is more going on in this world than we can see, taste, touch, or hear. There's got to be, right? It would be a waste if there's not something more going on here. It would just be a complete waste. Our brains have been built up to such high levels that we can think on anything. We can convince ourselves of anything. We can have conversations with people for hours on end. We can put caffeine on it. We can put downers on it. We can do things to our brain that change its composition in a way that changes how we speak and how we converse and how we think. And it's just magical. Everything we do is magical. The things we build are magical. The things we take down are kind of magical. It's amazing what we build from this little ant hill that is our world. It's amazing what ants do themselves, obviously. The fact they can carry their own brethren around. We can't really do that. Their strength is like 100 times ours or something. But the things we do and we create, and just from our brains that get put together, from technology, hardware, software, to content, movies, books, the things that these brains generate are absolutely astounding and absurd. There's got to be more. And maybe I'm afraid to see more. Maybe it's just not in my nature to want to. Maybe I sleep too hard. I don't know what it is. Certain people see things, though. And my wife sees things. She's able to see into some other aspect of a different realm. And while I don't want to see that, the fact that she can gives me hope for where we go and what we experience in this world. Because to go to all this trouble to create these human beings, to go to all this trouble to assemble the knowledge we do, and to assemble the friendships and the families and just all the work, there's got to be more, right? There has to be. The fact that people lived 5,000 years ago ultimately thinking many of the same things we think. There's got to be more, right? I mean, it's insane. But anyway, we're down at the shore, and the next morning we wake up. One of the things we do when we go to this hotel is our son, now that he's sleeping in a bed, I've always talked to you about when you have a kid, always get a suite, because you can put the kid in one of the rooms while he's sleeping, while in the other room you can still be adults and stay up and watch things and talk and drink and do whatever you need to do without having to go to bed at 8 o'clock. That's a key. So we had kind of maneuvered our situation here where we put him on the pull-out couch in the living area of the suite, and then we stayed from the point he went down. We closed the door. There's a weird little porthole on the door with the kind of nautical motif that's at this hotel, so we had to put some cardboard on that window. But we put him there, closed the door, and then we'd be in that room. But one of the other things is we have 2 queen beds in this suite. That's a default thing for a lot of rooms and suites. And look, we love each other, but if you have 2 queen beds, we can each stay in a bed. It's kind of cool. It doesn't mean we don't like each other. It doesn't mean it's like Leave It to Beaver where they push the beds apart and then pull it together when they want to create more beavers. So you sleep in those beds, you act like adults, and then all of a sudden you have a couple of great nights of sleep where you're a single person for a second while your significant other is right across the way, but you have your own beds. But we woke up the next morning, and she said, I saw a ghost at the end of my bed. And I'm like, oh God, this hotel opened in 1972. Jesus, how can there be ghosts? And she said it was a maid who was dressed in what she thought was 1980s sort of vestments and 1980s hair specifically. And that my wife was convincing herself, because she actually got scared for a moment about this. She was convincing herself it was her Aunt Jamie, who was on this trip with us in the other room with Melanie's mom and Melanie's grandmother. She was convincing her as Aunt Jamie because that was what was getting her through the kind of fear for the moment, whether it was because she was so tired and you're half asleep, half awake, you don't know what you're seeing, you're a little paranoid, off guard. So she was convincing herself it was Jamie. And so she was talking to her. And then all of a sudden she went to hug her, and the apparition, the ghost, whatever it is, tried to hug her too. And I'm like, I don't think I can sleep here again. For the next night, I'm looking around all freaked out. I never saw something again, and Melanie never did too, but I'm sitting there going, what the hell is going on here? I need to know more. What the hell is going on here? So she saw something. And then also she had a really vivid dream that night where she saw the beach kind of changing from, I think, light to dark, and almost like one of those darkness scenes where like all the crows fly. And she said all of a sudden all these grim reapers were on the beach. And that morning, I think it was her mom said, I think you're going to hear some bad news today. Lo and behold, we did. That was the night that my uncle passed away at about 8:15. He was there with one of my other uncles. That was all that was left. It was almost like he chose that to be the setting, the situation, that no one else was there except this other uncle. And I'm sitting there going, what is going on with these dreams? Melanie has some awareness. She has some keen skill that is amazing. I'm afraid to tap it because I'm afraid to see things and to find things out, even though I want to. I just want to see it. I want to know there's more. I want to know what the hell that's about. Is that her brain almost acting like a projector, putting something up on the screen that's in her subconscious, right? Like one of those, drive-in movie theaters, or even just a normal movie theater. You got the old school projector, and then it shoots what's on the tape up against the screen. Is this what this is? Is it her subconscious shooting in front of the screen in front of her in some half-sleep state? Or is it truly something she's seeing? Is it something that's existing in a separate realm? I just don't know, but I'm eternally fascinated by this. One of the other things with my Uncle Robert I'm completely fascinated by is that he said for the last couple of days, last week maybe, when he was in the hospital before he went to hospice, that he saw his mother his mother, my grandmother, who died months before I was born in 1982, he saw her sitting on the chair in the hospital, like kind of giving him a relief, making him know it's going to be okay. I think kind of holding his hand. And I'm like, whoa, this is just unbelievable. This just gives you hope that there's more to this. Do I need that hope? I don't know. I think life's pretty great. Although I think once you start getting a little older, and I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30. I'm 36. I don't know how the hell that happened. But I think you start to get a little older and you accumulate more and more knowledge and you realize how much is left versus how much you've put behind you. And I think there's a part of you that in light of all that, in light of all those circumstances and situations, wants more. You just kind of want something else, but you don't want to be put face to face with the something else before you get to that place. It's just kind of crazy. And actually, my Uncle Johnny, one of my dad's other brothers, who passed away, I think in 2003, he apparently also saw his mother waiting there. So, like, how does this spirit thing work? I don't know. Does time exist there? Or is the difference between my Uncle Johnny passing away in 2003 and Robert in 2018, 15 years later, is it the same for whatever that spirit world is? Do they see things in an almost advanced continuum? Does it go so quick? I don't know. But I think it's absolutely fascinating. And so, yeah, that happened. And it's really kind of, it's sad, but I think there reaches a point where there's only so much fight you have left and there's only so much more you can recuperate and your body can come back from it. And that cancer just, I mean, its very essence, it overtakes cells and propagates over cells in such a way that it almost substitutes for them. It's just absolutely crazy how that works. And, it was weird because there was a point there on that Sunday when I went to visit my uncle, and he actually asked everybody to leave except my dad because I think he was so overwhelmed by the moment that my wife was like, you know what, go back in there. You should stand in there. So I did. Never know what to say in those situations. I don't think it matters, but there's a weird vibe that you need to be saying something, and all of a sudden you're saying things that are the most obvious things you'd ever say in your life, but you're almost just saying them to get past these uncomfortable silences, and you don't know who it's uncomfortable for. Is it you? Is it the person who's in the bed? Are they cognizant? Are they aware of it? Is it your own neuroses that's just kind of walking right out there nakedly? But I started talking to my dad a little bit in this situation with my uncle right there. And I weirdly just started talking about Vietnam. And I just never would really talk to him otherwise and about this. And I just got done with the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary. It came out in September of 2017 to absolutely intense fanfare, as it should. Ken Burns and his partner Lynn Novick do an unbelievable job with whatever subject matter they touch, and it's often war. Ken Burns obviously did the one on baseball, but much of his work has been on war, the Civil War, the Great War, otherwise known as the World War II. And he ultimately ended up landing on Vietnam because that was the next one up. And just how much went on in Vietnam is astounding. The history going all the way back to the French occupation of what was then end up being called Vietnam, all the way up to the current day and post-war period of Vietnam, and even where you are today, where it's as if in some ways it didn't happen, because at some point, time like a beach where I was just at, waters over day after day, and there's only so many of those left to feel the intensity of being in that theater of war in that moment. And there's a lot of forgiving that happens. There's a lot of conversing between the different sides over the years as they come to grips with what they experienced, that it's just not as intense as it was. And I think because of that very fact, we lose touch with how profound the moment was, how profound the war was, how profound the breach in our country was as we sent off young boys from our country to die in a far away Asian country on the other side of the world, in a small place where we felt it was the last bastion to stop communism. It was the place where you were going to put your stake down in the ground and stop communism there so that it didn't spread everywhere. And this thing was unbelievable. This documentary blew my mind. The reason I ultimately started watching it now is because it finally hit Netflix at the end of, I believe it was the end of June. And so now it was available there. When it was on PBS, I started watching it. But if you didn't record it, and it's an 18-hour series, so you don't have the space on a DVR. And I'm obviously now without DVR I have it on my YouTube TV, but I'm a cord cutter. And it was on the PBS app as well. But if you didn't watch it in time, the earlier episodes would go away, and then it would go completely away. It was kind of a timed release, and then it went away in short order. So it wasn't there anymore, and I knew I was going to have to commit to it at some point, and I figured it would be on Netflix, just like all the other Ken Burns ones are, and then it did, and so I started watching this thing. I watched it at work, almost the way I would listen to a podcast. I just watched it as I was working, and this thing so profoundly affected me. The connections to today were stark, unbelievable. It just goes to show how much we don't learn from history, from how Nixonian Donald Trump really is, but I don't think as intelligently. Nixon was somebody who prevaricated, otherwise known as the nice word for lying, but he did it in service of a narrative which in some ways would possibly bring positive aspects to the country through his own narcissism. I'm just convinced Donald Trump doesn't have that. I don't think he has any care for what happens to the country. More so his own narcissism, which if it works out for the country, good. If not, whatever. Trump's number one. That's how it works. Really, Trump number one. Sure, his family, sure, it's close, but it's really Trump number one. So if something aligns with his transactional politics, he's all in. And if the country's good aligns with it, so be it. If it doesn't, so be that too. But what you saw in this documentary, and you look at 18 hours and you go, oh my God, this is going to be a snooze fest. This is a bore. How is this going to be? How can you sit through this? It's so affecting. It took 10 years to create this documentary. The subjects that Burns and Novak got to talk about the war from both sides, from many sides, was unbelievable. From the Viet Cong to the North Vietnamese to the South Vietnamese to prisoners of war to everyday soldiers. And the live footage you had, which to a degree the World War II movie had, which the Civil War didn't have. But as we came of age with the modern media in Vietnam, the news telecasts as anchormen would go over and be embedded with the troops to bear witness to the atrocities, and for those atrocities to not almost be recognized by the American forces, that they'd become so inured to the war, so inured to the numbers of those they killed. They just became ratios and, and just a tally that was added up. I think there was something like 2 or 3 million Vietnamese that died in that war. And I believe about 60,000 Americans died. But when you actually got down deep in it and you learned about what each battle meant and how just utterly pointless some of them were, where the task at hand, the order would be to take that hill, and the hill didn't mean a damn thing. It didn't lead anywhere. And you take the hill at much loss. It would almost be a Pyrrhic victory. And then you'd abandon the hill because you had to move to the next things, and the opposition would take the hill back, and you'd have to maybe take it back again. I mean, it was just utterly hopeless to watch this. And I just imagine, sure, you can be patriotic, absolutely, but I'm on board with those who didn't agree with it, not because they're being babies or because they're being cowardly, but you reach a point where you're like, what does this other country mean to me? How does this align with the interests of America beyond the existential capitalism versus communism aspect? And I would be scared shitless to go to Vietnam. I give so much credit to those who went. It just was, you lived it. Obviously you didn't go by watching this documentary, but how immersive this thing was just unbelievable. And I can't recommend watching it enough. I just was blown away from the music done by Trent Reznor and his partner. Trent Reznor does so much good stuff now with movies and documentaries and all that. He's just become a cottage industry for this, and it's got the true Reznor sound. So it's like that modern sort of noise metal thing going on with some really kind of emotional moments, which are almost not poppy, but minor chord sad. It hit the mark in such a big way. And the way this thing was put together, I mean, it's so easy to say that about a Ken Burns documentary, something that was worked on for 10 years, but this was a labor of something. And I could almost watch it again. I mean, there were just so many poignant moments in this. The one where I didn't even realize the war came to the streets of Saigon itself. It was almost like a Baghdad war in a way. Like there was literally gunfighting in the streets. And there's one scene, anyone who grew up in this time remembers this, but I never knew about this. Live TV, there was one scene where a member of the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese, they're hand in hand, much the same, was brought to the center of a street after he was found. And I think an American didn't want to shoot him, but one of the South Vietnamese colonels just picked a gun and shot the guy in the head on live TV. And you just saw him buckle under and blood start spurting out of the bullet hole. It was like, what the hell am I watching? And there was one really affecting scene from this gentleman who's in the documentary named Bill Musgrave. Just a tremendous source for this documentary. The way he spoke was cinematic. The way he spoke was dramatic. The way he was interviewed was real. You could just feel the emotions of this coming through. A man who came back from the war and ultimately became someone who was a critic of the war. Prisoners against the war, prisoners against Vietnam, or not prisoners, soldiers against Vietnam, which is just amazing for someone who made it all the way through to come back and to put themselves out there to criticize. And there was a moment in one of the episodes of the documentary where he was home or something, and his dad was home, and his dad was a tough, stern guy, very patriotic. And there was something in there in the paper about, I don't know if it was like op-eds or something, where they said that they're going to come for Bill Musgrave. They're going to come for this guy because he turned on the war. He's not patriotic. And the dad, Bill Musgrave, was not sure how the dad would fall on that. Would he be somebody who's on the side of the mob, the violent, angry mob? And the dad said something to the effect, and it makes you want to just tear up when you're watching it. He said something to the effect of, if they come for us, if they come for you, they're going to have to go through two people because I'm with you, son. And it was like, holy moly, what this war did, down to the Kent State thing where they shot students and like 4 people died. I mean, it was really instructive to watch this thing because we think things are so terrible and divided right now. And they are, let's be honest, they're pretty divided, but they're almost digitally divided, where things haven't hit on the society truly as hard as they did in something like Vietnam. And maybe it's because we're not in real life IRL as much as you were then, where there was no internet, there was no sort of digital life. Everything was what you see is what you get right there. Your interactions were person to person. They were real. Your media was newspapers and a couple of channels on TV. And so now we might be able to offload some of the intense emotions into the digital world, which maybe offsets how hard it comes at us in the real world. But we did have Charlottesville, where a poor woman was killed when an angry, I guess, white nationalist drove his car through a group of people. We are visited upon by violence, whether we're thinking of school shootings, which in some ways are homegrown terrorists, right? I mean, they are. How is that different than Islamic terrorists? It's homegrown. They're all terrorists. They're people going in and terrorizing populations of people, terrorizing innocent people who are just trying to live in a modern world and live forward to ideals that that our society aspires to. Education, movies, entertainment, all the places that gun violence finds its way in us. So there is the breach, but I felt a lot of the parallels, but there's also not as many. But man, that is a documentary worth watching. And I really was, I was talking to my dad almost about this documentary in this moment. And I said to him, "What, you were sort of around the age of Vietnam. What happened?" And he told me that he went to join the Air Force, and he actually did, and then came home and told his mother, expecting her to basically throw a party for him. And she started crying and said, "You have to go back immediately and get out of that. You have to get out of that immediately." And the amazing thing is he followed her words, and he was able to get out easily because, unfortunately, his father had passed away when my dad was 16, and my dad was the oldest of his he was the oldest of 5 brothers. My dad, Johnny, Billy, Kevin, Robert. Yeah, 5. I'm like doing the math there. And because of that, because he was the head of household, he was sort of a sole male earner in the family, he could get deferred in a moment, and he did get deferred. But you could really tell that I think he kind of knows he was lucky to not have to go, but there's a part of him that obviously with that initial reaction, with that initial action, wanted to go and didn't go, couldn't go. So there's sort of a suspended animation with that. And there's probably a part of you that saw many people die over there, and maybe there's some guilt, and maybe there's some relief too. But I was talking to him about a lot about that, and also was on this kick with Vietnam. So I watched Platoon, which was a Best Picture in the Oscars. It's a good one. I mean, so many people have seen Platoon, but Oliver Stone. It's a little goofy at times because it sort of has that 80s, like the 80s version of CGI in the war scenes, which didn't feel as real, but they were real too. And I think just being on the heels of watching the Vietnam documentary, the real reality, made this movie almost a little lesser than, but I could see how important this movie probably was at the time because it was so close. I think it was within 10 years of the war actually ending. And it did bring to light a lot of the aspects of the indiscriminate killing, raping of locals, that we weren't there just doing great stuff, that there were a lot of psychopaths kind of going around getting their rocks off on using this like a modern day video game. But a lot of the lessons were in there, and Charlie Sheen was good in it. The interesting part, Kevin Dillon being in that movie was weird. Him as Johnny Drama in Entourage, and I always thought that was sort of like the only thing he was in, because his brother Matt Dillon has more of the IMDb acting roster there. But Kevin Dillon was really good in Platoon, and it almost feels like I'm watching Entourage because I know him so much from Entourage. To see him in this playing a real dramatic role was almost like when in Entourage Vince was playing Pablo Escobar in Medellin, and you're like, wait, this doesn't feel right. But he was very good. The other documentary I would recommend was The Fourth Estate. I talked a little bit about it, but I finally finished it, and man, was I touched by this documentary. This is the year in the life of the New York Times, fully behind the curtain, from the point Donald Trump was elected to that first year, and to the point where the reporters won their Pulitzers, and I was getting the chills because Trent Reznor did the music for this documentary too, and it had a lot of the same tracks, so sort of the sad, uplifting Trent Reznor songs, and I think it's Atticus Rose or Ross or something is his partner. The same Vietnam sad music was in this when they were doing the Pulitzer speeches, and they're standing up on the stairs of that large New York Times building that looks out on the many floors down below, and then getting the standing ovations. I was getting goosebumps watching this documentary behind the scenes on the twists and turns of this Trump presidency, and how the paper, which is the farthest thing when you watch this from fake news, how this paper sources itself, how hard it goes into being really discerning on the stories and making sure they're not just printing anything, and just going to the farthest lengths possible to be completely sure that what you have to go to print with is correct and is right and is the right decision. Man, was it good. And seeing all these people who have become stars over the year, really getting their star turn in the public view because of the way they've kept Donald Trump to account. How successful has that been? I don't know. We'll have to see as we reach midterm elections and as we reach the next presidential election. You really only know the tide is turned in those major moments. I always say it's like a Super Bowl. You have the two sides in a Super Bowl, and you're equally convinced either could win, even if one is a major underdog and one is a major favorite. You're convinced by history and by what you've seen in past Super Bowls that crazy things can happen, that an onside kick can happen, that a fumble can happen, that the trajectory of the game can change on one play, and that anybody can have that great day on that any given Sunday, right? The ultimate any given Sunday, which is the Super Bowl. And then all of a sudden, all the prognosticating that happens, which is very similar to politics, except in the Super Bowl, it's every year. All the prognosticating that's happening about the trends of the game. Is it the RPO, the run pass offense or whatever? Is it the air it out? Is it the I formation? Is it the 5 wide? Is it, all these things that are trends and certainties that mean one team's going to win over the other? They're all dispelled, sometimes within moments when that Super Bowl starts. And once that Super Bowl ends and the one team wins, then all of a sudden you have the hindsight of the prognosticating leading up to it. But you truly only know when that Super Bowl is played, when that Super Tuesday happens, when that presidential election happens, when that midterm election happens. That's when you see the sweeps of history happen on those major days, those Super Bowl days. And so we will see. But watching this documentary and being reminded of all the insanity over that first year, all of the twists and turns of the Russia investigation, and why we're even at the points with the Russia investigation. So much news is thrown at the news cycle day after day, hour after hour, in many cases by the president himself. By his own tweets, by his own hand, by his own fingers. And then on the other side, by all those working in his administration who are freely and openly confidential sources to newspapers, telling the ins and outs of what they are truly seeing behind the curtain and how much worse in some cases it is than anyone even understands. It's amazing to watch, and it just makes you so proud that we have such an independent media in this country, something we cannot take for granted. That First Amendment is so important, that freedom of speech, that freedom of the press, that freedom that they are doing the right things to double and triple check sources and stories, and to go to paper, to go to the digital form with those words, with those stories, and to constantly enthrall us and to constantly surprise us. You've seen it on steroids now. This president, the one thing I do have to say he's done is that he has brought out the best in many of the institutions. They didn't get their chance in some ways when they're covering a very basic, vanilla presidency and administration, where you understand what news is coming out on Tuesday and Thursday and Friday and Monday, and you're tipped off to this policy position being put out there. Everything here turns on a dime, and they have been forced to adapt and adjust so intensely that they should be paid much more, to be honest. But watching this fourth estate, I just loved it. I was so enthralled by this. I couldn't stop watching it. I felt like I was watching the movie The Post, and this was real life. And just the doubts they have about their own jobs and about their own ideas. And, hearing about how they get the big stories and what they do, and the one where Michael Schmidt had to go down and cover Mar-a-Lago during one of the holiday breaks because he was one of the Jewish people, and where, they were basically saying like, well, on Christmas, who will go? The Jewish guy will go down to Mar-a-Lago. And he was sitting in like a local diner, and all of a sudden he got a tip off that Donald Trump was going to be at one of his golf courses in the dining room at a certain time. And then if Michael Schmidt showed up, he could probably start talking to him. And so all of a sudden he shows up in this goofy golf gear, and he sits with Donald Trump for 30 minutes, and he can't almost record it, but he's taking notes and all this stuff. And just on the turn of a dime, he got the ultimate get. He got an amazing story. That thing goes to publish. And I hate to say it, it was an amazing get, but then 2 days later, it all upends anyway, because it's just a constantly churning reality television show where truth is absolutely stranger than fiction. I mean, it's unbelievable. But it was really, really great to watch that. Can't recommend it enough. The Vietnam documentary and The Fourth Estate. And you know what? If you do those and then you watch the movie The Post, maybe around it, it's like a perfect segue between them. The two are documentaries, and then The Post sort of, it's based on truth, but with great actors and actresses. Meryl Streep as Katharine Graham was one of the all-time actress subject alignments. So why don't we call it there, folks? It's been great talking with you again. We will pick it up soon, my friends. Take it easy.